Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I asked the listeners what I should get you for Christmas this year, and I have a list.
Oh, geez.
I have a Seahawks team shower curtain, except replace every player's face with yours.
God. Oh.
I have a Finger 11 box set, since you had mentioned them.
Do they have box sets?
Maybe. I guess we'll find out.
Let's find out how many albums. No way do they have enough for a box set.
Well, you had mentioned them in the worst band, best song category. So.
Oh, and of course they're Canadian.
Yes. Well, that was the point. Let's see. Another one for shower curtain. A spell book for new witches, essential spells to change your life. Glitchy Lauren gave To Ride a Silver Broomstick and To Stir a Magic Cauldron as two books that she got when she was 16 and mattered to her. So you can do that.
I'm not 6. What?
Highlander's Bewitching Healer, which is apparently an ebook. And there is a fantastic little cup that has a picture of a bee with a witch's hat on it that says Bewitched. And I think that's going to have to be the thing. I think either that or a framed copy of whatever the hell Droplay Dave made of you tonight.
Okay, so I appreciate the generosity, James, but I request that this does not happen.
I don't think you have much say in the matter. Our patrons have spoken.
Okay, just because they give us money doesn't mean we have to do.
You gave me a bingo shirt at a live show. You shut your mouth. I will send you stuff.
It was to replace your lost bingo stuff.
Not something that. No, you have lost the moral high ground here. I am Obi-Wan. You are done.
So Finger 11, by the way, 9 albums, 10 if you include a Greatest Hits, which if you're giving someone a box set, why are you including the Greatest Hits album?
Yeah.
Seems like a filler, yeah.
And with that, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. So the Lions beat the Vikings, and we have a lot to talk about as a result of that. And we have a mailbag as well to go over. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You get access to stuff like the bonus episodes, which about an hour ago I put a new one out. So check that out. It's only about 45 minutes, but that's because the Christmas episodes are coming out in about 2 weeks. So you've got plenty of content coming your way. And the Patreon people get an extra Christmas episode. So if you enjoy the Christmas episode, go over to Patreon, sign up. You'll get at least one more. And if that's not a deal, I don't know what is. So check it out, patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well for a one-time donation. Or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and be one of the fine people out there that today went out and got a Norse Code baby onesie, which was a real thing that happened today for somebody. Thank you so much. Whoever you are awesome. And a special note, Arif was on the POD cast with Jeremy Reisman last week previewing the Lions and the Vikings and spent the last 5 minutes of the show talking about all the items in the Norse Code Threadless shop, because apparently they don't have merch, but we do. So
yeah. I want to be clear, this was very much not appreciated, nor the point in a typical podcast guest appearance that one is generally asked to plug their stuff. So I just kind of did it.
You were shilling like crazy, and I appreciated that. I enjoyed that. I don't know if it led to any sales, but I did appreciate you going out of your way to just shill like hell. So
it seemed like it led to at least 2. So
yeah.
Certainly worth my dignity in that moment. Hopefully you all can do the same thing by slowly chipping away at my dignity with purchases of things like throw pillows and shower curtains.
And t-shirts and mugs and masks. All these things can be found at norsecode.threadless.com.
And stickers, importantly, stickers.
And stickers, which is apparently a major...
Yeah, it's a point of contention, it seems like, in the Lions podcast universe.
Why? It's not that hard to have. Whatever.
That's what I said.
They'll realize it at one point. They were just amazed that we had like weaponized our situation. You people, you fools. Well, let's get into the show. The Vikings lost. This defense stinks. And I guess my first question about the game is about Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith was not on the field for the first game. Mm-hmm. He was also not on the field for the second game. What happened? Was the disappearance of Harrison Smith that big of a deal, or was this just a situation where Ed Donatel forgot how to call defensive plays?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of everything, right? Like, I think not having Harrison Smith, pretty important, especially when you have a team that's a little bit more committed to, deep throwing, at least this week versus a couple of weeks ago, because they have Jameson Williams. I think that some of it has to do with, the fact that the Vikings are just not very good at cornerback, like, period, right? That seems to be a big issue. I don't know, like, there are just kind of like problems all over the defense. I was talking to somebody who was trying to review the Vikings film, because they had a little bit of trouble figuring out why the Vikings were doing what they were doing. And they generally do a really good job breaking down film, so I trust them. And we were talking about kind of the way that the defense has been set up, what the responsibilities in the defense are, and how the checks work inside the defense. So the Lions would motion every so often and force the Vikings into their base defense checks. And the base defense is like spectacularly not good, right? And so the Lions knew how to attack it. And it seemed like we were trying to figure out whether or not, it was the fault of the person wearing the green dot, which is typically Eric Kendricks, or the fault of Ed Donatel for designing the defense in such a way that, the person with the green dot doesn't have many options available to them to accommodate, things like switching, offensive schemes or motions or shifts or whatever, to get into a different defensive play, right? So there's like all kinds of problems. Harrison Smith is only, not having him is only kind of like one of the elements involved here. What's really frustrating is that there were some elements of the defense that were like firing in all cylinders, right? Like Za'Darius Smith, you watch back at his game and he was incredible. Like it's really annoying because Za'Darius Smith, I don't know that he ended up with anything in the stat sheet. But I mean, he played spectacularly, and the ball just gets out a little bit too quickly for him to be able to do anything about it, at least as a pass rusher, right? And so, there's some elements where you can say, well, that's clearly not the issue. Daniil Hunter is not the issue. Dalvin Tomlinson is kind of an issue, but not really, right? It seems like he doesn't have the explosion he had before the calf injury, and that might resolve itself this week anyway, right? So, is it Jordan Hicks? Is Eric Kendricks playing a little bit slower? And Luke mentioned on the football machine that it seems like Kendricks is taking a little bit more time. And for linebackers, after the snap, a little bit more time could be a tenth of a second, right? It could be, as long as a quarter of a second, but it doesn't have to be that long. But being late to trigger is really difficult for a linebacker in order to be as successful as they are. And it could be adapting to the new defense. It could be that the defense is a little bit confusing in terms of what his responsibilities should be from play to play. It could be any number of things. But the person I was talking to breaking down film also mentioned Eric Kendricks and said, the 54 that I'm looking at is not one that I recognize. And so I choose to believe that it's not Eric Kendricks. So there is something here where Kendricks is playing a little bit slower. And I think it is really unlikely the guy that was playing, not impossible, certainly people fall off cliffs, but it's really unlikely that the guy that was playing at the level he was last year and the year before especially, it has fallen off this significantly or is not smart or anything like that. I think it is much more likely that there's an issue with the way that the coordinating is working. So, yeah. The problem is not that they missed Harrison Smith. That exacerbated the issues that were already there.
This wasn't good. This wasn't good by a country mile. There were plays that just broke open for seemingly no reason. Coverage that was absolutely blown. The bomb of a pass. That first touchdown is the first thing I think about when it comes to this game, where you just looked at the defense and went, he couldn't have been more open if he tried.
Yeah, and in fact, Goff underthrew Jameson Williams on that.
That
and
was
he just
the
had
other
time
thing. Like,
to field the punt. He's so far away from other people, he could just field it.
That was ridiculous. A corner, a safety anywhere near him would have been able to pick that off like a punt.
Yeah, it was very frustrating to watch. I retweeted, I think it was Ben Guessing. It said that Josh Metellus been on play action, and the replay showed pretty clearly that it was Cameron Bynum. Metellus, it seemed like, actually had a pretty good game, which is interesting as he's the third safety and Bynum is the starting safety. But yeah, no, it was a really awful showing by the defense all around. I mean, we saw mistakes from Cameron Dancer. We saw mistakes from Cameron Bynum. We saw mistakes from Patrick Peterson, Jordan Hicks, and Eric Hendricks. I mean, it was truly kind of like, from a coverage standpoint, all hands on deck in terms of who was making mistakes. It was brutally bad. And I think the majority of the blame is probably on Cameron Dancer, but that first blown coverage, for sure, first of all, it felt like the game was just going to unravel from there, right? But second, that first blown coverage was for sure on Bynum. And actually, I think O'Connell broke it down after the game. He said something along the lines of, I'm trying to remember it, that Bynum's responsibility, because I think he said they were in a kind of quarters, which makes me think it was probably cover 6. But Bynum's responsibility on crossers is to nail the crosser, which makes sense. That's the responsibility of the far safety in cover 4, right? That's the thing that Anthony Harris was so good at a couple of years ago for the Vikings, which, by the way, he's available. He just visited the Eagles, who had an injury at safety with CJ Gardner-Johnson. So he could reunite with the Eagles. But just putting that out there, Anthony Harris was a really good cover 4 safety for the Vikings when they wanted to do cover 4 stuff, and he was really good at nailing crossers, like when a receiver is running from, usually it'll be outside the numbers, but basically one side of the field to the other, and running across basically 18 or more yards to do that. So getting to the opposite sideline from where they started. It could be an over route, or if they're running it shallower, it could be a crosser. And the job of the far safety, or the safety that is lined up to the opposite hash of where that receiver started, is to pick up that crosser in cover 4. It's a pretty common assignment in cover 4. It's a way to adjust for the fact that if you didn't have someone pick up that crosser, you would be pretty weak in coverage. And you can attack, that tendency, but because it takes a long time for that crosser to get open, it is not the easiest thing in the world to attack. It's not difficult. It's not the easiest thing in the world to attack. And you've got to find some way to account for that. Usually your outside corner on the same side of the field is going to pick that up. So his responsibility is to attack the crosser. And the Lions were running a route that was a very, very deep whip route where someone basically pretended that they were going to run the crosser and then whipped back out towards the sideline. I think some people call it a pivot route. Some people call it a pilot route. Very rarely they'll call it a jerk route, and not because they make a jerking motion, but because it makes the player in coverage look like a jerk, which I think is stupid. That's a stupid reason to name things. But jerk routes typically are aimed at linebackers and are much shallower and are named the same thing for the same reason. I hate it. Just, by the way, football lore, that sucks. They should come up with better reasons for names. But yeah, so he's running like a deep whip or a deep pivot or whatever you want to call it. He acts as if he's running across and he runs out. And so Bynum is frozen by that, not by the play action. And that's, I think, what O'Connell was. I mean, he didn't say not by play action. He said he was frozen by the crosser he thought he was supposed to cover. And that gave Jameson Williams the ability to get deep. That's on Bynum, right? But that doesn't make it like he was stupid or anything like that. There was a reason that he made the particular mistake that he made, and the Lions specifically attacked that tendency against that coverage, right? But it also, that's a problem, right? Because it means the Lions they were going to be in that coverage and attack that. It doesn't really happen the same way on the cover two side of things. If you've got a cover two safety, right? They don't really. They pick up opposite field crossers, but they are very aware of like most dangerous man principle on deep routes, and at some point your cover two corner is going to have to pick up a deep route or start floating deep. So they knew about that tendency, and they attacked it, and that's what led to the blown coverage. But in terms of like the total, like, so like in terms of like 20+ yard plays, there was Amon-Ra St. Brown got a 20-yarder. I guess it's a 25-yarder with Yak, but a 20-yard depth against Eric Hendricks. That's just a kind of a mismatch. Those things will happen. I know that Jordan Hicks got burned kind of underneath a little bit more often. Peterson gave up a 20-yarder, 21 with a Yak to Josh Reynolds. Remember that play? Cameron Dancer got victimized by DJ Chark all game. I think the longest he gave up was a 48-yarder. That one, I think he just got beat. Metellus didn't get beat too often. Shannon Sullivan, much to my surprise, didn't get beat too often. I thought they were going to attack him a little bit more. Cameron Bynum, we just talked about the Jameson Williams one. But everybody basically had a big play that they gave up. Like, unless, you were like Duke Shelley, right? Which actually, I think Duke Shelley gave up like a 15 or 18-yarder to Josh Reynolds, right? But unless you were somebody just didn't play that many coverage snaps, like Patrick Jones or Zadarius Smith or Daniil Hunter, you were giving up a big play. Josh Metellus, I think, is like the exception to that, but everybody else basically gave up a big play somewhere. So problems all around.
Well, another question that people had about this was about the lack of pass rush. The Vikings didn't seem to be at any point in time anywhere near Jared Goff.
So again, I think that this is just really a product of the Lions being able to get rid of the ball quickly enough on those snaps where somebody was winning. Like, I think the total time to throw for Jared Goff was still pretty long on average, but a lot of that has to do with like the plays where they were on play action and all that. But on plays where the Vikings were winning off the snap, Goff was getting rid of the ball quickly, and I think mostly because they like anticipated it, not because like Goff is doing a great job managing the pocket. I think that the Lions are just doing a pretty good job of what the Rams did so many years ago to make Goff look, like some sort of god at quarterback back like 2018, right? But I mean, he wasn't under pressure very often, but the offensive line still saw some losses. So I think he was under pressure on less than 25. No, actually, it says right here 26.8% of snaps. So not very often at all. When he was under pressure, it wasn't very good. He completed 3 out of 10 passes for 4.1 yards per attempt. He had no big time throws in that situation, and his depth of target was just 2.7. So when they were able to get pressure, they were able to force him to get rid of the ball short and not very accurately. The Vikings didn't blitz very often. I think that their blitz rate was still a little bit higher than it has been on average. So it's not as if they didn't anticipate it, but their blitzes were not getting very much pressure. So I think a lot of it is just the moments where they got pressure, the Lions kind of knew what was coming, and you just didn't have that many third and longs where it's going to be a pass, so you give yourself license to kind of win quickly instead of having to read the play. And, the quarterback doesn't really have the option to get rid of the ball quickly because they have to wait for their route to open up or for the receiver to gain depth or something along those lines. And you just didn't have that many third and longs. So that's kind of part of it, but I think a lot of it is just they kind of anticipated what the Vikings' pressure plan was going to be. They did a pretty good job preventing that from becoming like a huge, huge issue. I think Goff was only hit a couple of times. So he threw away the ball with some degree of quickness in order to get rid of pressure. And a lot of it I think is the Lions' offensive design. A lot of it is how the Vikings didn't force them into situations where they felt like they needed to hold onto the ball. A lot of it was Goff actually kind of doing his job at quarterbacking, making sure that it wasn't too much of a liability for him.
Goff beat us. But more importantly, this is what, the fourth or fifth time in a row where a quarterback's thrown for more than 300 yards against us. Like, this isn't good. This is a defense that is on a team heading toward the playoffs. This is a defense that's going to cost this team badly.
Yep. That's the only answer. So again, the issues start with the secondary. I'm not saying that like, and I don't want to like misconstrue my point about this specific game about the defensive line. Like, certainly there are some things that, you know, some members of the defensive line could have done better to rush the passer. But I think Hunter played well. I think Smith played well. I think Tomlinson played well. You know, it's just that they couldn't get home on these things. And I think it's kind of the same thing here, where the secondary is just not giving the pass rush time to pass rush. And I think the secondary is going to continue to be a problem. Danso played an awful game. Bynum played a surprisingly bad game, given kind of what we've seen from him so far. Peterson gave up, you know, pretty big. Like, it's just that there were opportunities short and quick, and there were opportunities deep when the pressure wasn't coming. And so a lot of that's just the secondary. Again, Braun pointed out that there were like 3 cornerbacks on the roster for 2023. That number, I mean, that's important, but that number kind of doesn't matter, right? They just need to bring in cornerbacks and hope that like Lewis Seen can get back healthy and develop at safety, because Bynum, I think, has been really fun to follow. He's been a really good starter. But it seems like he's probably a better fit for a Zimmer system, maybe like a lot of these players are, unless he can grow with everybody else. Because, I mean, maybe it's the defensive back coaching. I mean, the Lions kind of discovered, you know, when they got rid of their defensive backs coach, that they suddenly got a lot better on defense. You know, maybe it's less Donatello, though. Again, I think that he has a pretty significant role to play here, and more, who's the defensive backs coach? Durante Jones still, I think. That could be kind of at issue here. So, yeah, I mean, this defense is bad. They've given up a ton of yards to quarterbacks, in particular on like a yard per attempt basis. It's not as if the Vikings are like coming out to these big leads and other teams are forced to throw, and by circumstance, because they throw the ball 55 times, they get 400 yards. It's not like one of those things. It's more like, you know, the Vikings defense is just giving up consistent play after consistent play, and then occasionally also happen to give up like an explosive here or there. So it is a rough defense. They're not doing enough on first and second down to stop the run either, to make those third downs a little bit easier. They're not forcing third downs, but primarily it is a pass coverage issue.
This is bad. This was real bad. And this was also aided by the fact that the offense wasn't able to do anything as like what they would normally be able to accomplish. You had tweeted out that this seemed like what happened the first time that they had met, except the Vikings were able to score. Like, the Vikings were able to score, and as a result, were able to hang on and win. But like this was bad.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because they wasted the best game I've seen from Kirk Cousins in like 2 or 3 years. And I was wondering, like, you know, hey, how would Pro Football Focus evaluate this game? Because, you know, not that they're the end all be all. For example, the Chargers Dolphins game, they gave to a higher grade than they gave Herbert, I think. And I wouldn't have done that, right? So it's not, I don't like think that they, but as a proxy for evaluating performance independent of supporting cast, which again, I don't think they do an amazing job of doing, but they do a better job than most statistics. I wanted to see kind of how that bore out. This is the best grade they've given Cousins also in 2 or 3 years. Certainly it's a better grade than anything he had last year. And I think the year before he had 2 games with a higher grade. Like 2019 was probably, I think, Philadelphia and Detroit, if I'm remembering the PFF grades. But this is a pretty rare performance, like regardless, right? He had a wonderful game. Justin Jefferson broke a franchise regular season record in receiving yardage. Should have broken the all-time record if the refs didn't call him out of bounds on a particular play, right? It was 30 yards taken away from him. It was a stunning performance, but unfortunately, you know, the Vikings still ended up in situations where they had to kick field goals or punt. And that's not really Cousins' fault. If you put him into like 3rd and 8 situations, you know, he can play some pretty good football and still not convert a good chunk of those. The Vikings were on 3rd down a lot. They were in 3rd and long a lot because they couldn't run the ball. And I was complaining about how often they would run the ball. I got some pushback from Twitter user Forrester. I don't know if he's in the Discord. He might be. I don't think he is, though. Twitter user Forrester, who was like, well, if you take a look at kind of the run pass tendencies of the Vikings, they actually ran the ball less than you'd expect given the situation. So I looked at rbsdon'tmatter.com to kind of see if that was the case. And the Vikings, if you define the situation as down and distance, the Vikings threw the ball at like 5% higher a clip than the average NFL team. But I was a little bit like, first of all, I misread the graph initially, so that's my mistake. But I was still kind of curious about this. So, the Vikings did only run the ball 17 times. They threw the ball like, I don't know, like 50 plus times, 48 times, something like that. They dropped back to pass like 48 times. So, the ratio is not all that high. It felt high just because of how futile it was. But then I eliminated all the plays where the Vikings had a 10% or less probability to win, right? Where basically any coach would throw in that situation. And that dropped to 2%, right? They had a 2%, or I think it was 2%, a 2% increase over the standard team based off of down and distance. And that's stupid. I think they should be throwing the ball a lot more generally, but especially when the running game is just not working. And again,
and it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, like 1.4 yards per carry. It was like I tweeted out like they shouldn't be running the ball. It was at 1.4 yards a carry. And then later on, I think Alec Lewis, my former colleague at The Athletic, tweeted out a statistic about, how often Dalvin Cook was getting, yards before contact. And I believe right now he's like lowest in the league, or the Vikings are lowest in the league in yards before contact. And I tweeted out, at that time that I tweeted out, it was at 1.1 yards per carry. And, they had a great run that brought it all the way up to 1.4 yards per carry again. It was just awful. But again, I guess it was only 17 runs, right? And they didn't run the ball very much in the second half, but it definitely felt like they ran it a lot more. And certainly, I think they could have done with just a little bit more passing. Now, it's weird to encounter any game, that ends up close. Like if they, theoretically, if I'm right and they pass the ball just a little bit more, they at least end up close if they don't win outright. But certainly they end up close, right? And it's very weird to find a game where teams end up close and like you only run the ball 10 times, right? Like that is pretty unusual. So you are asking for something that is kind of outside even the most pass-happy coach's wheelhouse, but they were so bad at running the ball, so bad at it, that it just felt like, I don't know, man, like going into the game, they should have thought that, maybe we're not going to be running the ball that much because, this Lions defense seems pretty constructed around defending the run. Now, if you take a look at EPA or whatever and DVOA, their run defense by EPA has the same rank as their pass defense by EPA. Of course, passing is always a higher EPA proposition anyway, so you should probably do it a little bit more. But DVOA, I think their run defense was lower ranked in DVOA than their pass defense. That all kind of contradicts my fundamental thesis, but I still think that if you watch the Lions and see how they want to play, they primarily work to defend the run and then just kind of trust the back end to do things. And I would much rather take that tack because of how many run defenders they have. Like you take a look at those linebackers. I mean, anybody who listened to the preview knows you take a look at those linebackers. The linebackers are primarily run defending linebackers who have issues in coverage. You take a look at those linemen. Sometimes they play two nose tackles up front. Their defensive ends are primarily good run defenders that also have the ability where they can happen to rush the passer. Like it is primarily a run defending unit, and it still felt like they were running the ball too much. And certainly, the outcome of the game really tells us that they weren't running very effectively, right? At 1.4 yards per carry. So just a slog fest up front, and it forced some pretty bad situations for the Vikings. It was really difficult for them to get out of.
Couple of bad situations. Pass game wasn't as bad as it could have been, which is an odd sentence, but Jefferson went out and had a career day. Hawkinson had that big drop on third down, but he was all over the place and moving.
Yeah, otherwise he was really good. Again, he kind of struggled as a pass protector, not like a huge shock, but anything outside of that, I thought he did pretty well. No, I mean, I thought the passing game was pretty excellent. I think like half the yards went to Jefferson, half the yards went to everyone else. um, Kind of an interesting situation, but um, I don't know. I think that the passing game largely worked. I mean, if it was better, the Vikings might have won, but that is kind of an absurd counterfactual. It's really difficult to demand better than what they were able to put together. They did a lot. Kirk Cousins did a lot. He was under tons of pressure and he did a lot. Like, this is one of the reasons this is one of the best games we've seen from Cousins. It's not just that he was able to thread the ball accurately, deep downfield, read the situation, get the ball to the right spot, victimized by drops maybe, but it's not just that he did all of those things efficiently and well. It's that he did it when the Lions did what I predicted, which is blitz the ball a lot more than they have over the past couple of weeks, because Cousins has been so poor against the blitz, at least statistically, over the last couple of weeks. And he was phenomenal. He was even better against the blitz than he was on the standard drop back, which is typically what you expect from, quarterbacks that are veterans and are fairly cerebral, right? Is they tend to do better against the blitz than against standard dropbacks, right? So Cousins was spectacular. Jefferson was phenomenal. The rest of the passing game, I thought, like you said, TJ Hawkinson had the drop, but I think for the most part they did all right. KJ Osborne showed up occasionally. Adam Thielen had a couple of critical catches again. Brian O'Neill was a decent pass protector. I think outside of that, the pass protection was, bad, but not shocking that it was bad. Kind of more of what you'd expect in that situation. But yeah, I mean, the production far exceeded what the offensive line would typically allow to happen given that level of performance. Like, you'd expect a far worse performance even from good quarterbacks. So it was nice to see. It's just they couldn't support that with a good special teams unit for like the first time in a while. A consistent defense, a good running game, and so on. So it was really difficult for the offense to actually put points on the board, despite how well tuned the passing game finally seemed to be.
For the record, if you are in that stadium and cheering for Detroit and you are booing TJ Hawkinson every time he goes onto the field.
So I don't get this. Like, it's weird, right? Like, right?
He wasn't demanding a trade. Like, again, it would be different if he demanded a trade and burned all his bridges on the way out.
Right. Yeah, that's why, like if Vikings fans had booed Stephon Diggs, which I felt like, right? Because they had Stephon Diggs back in the stadium, didn't they? I'm trying to remember.
They have not.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, maybe not. But should that happen, right? It would not shock me if Vikings fans booed Stephon Diggs. It's been long enough that, whatever, right? Even though he was essentially the architect of the Minneapolis Miracle, right? He demanded a trade. He got himself out there, and he burned some bridges along the way, and so on, right? Like, I get it, right? I wouldn't agree, but I get it. Like, all Hawkinson said, the closest thing that he got to a shot was, man, it really feels nice to be winning. Mind you, when he was traded, the Lions were 1-6, right? He had not been part of a winning Lions season. Now, since the trade, the Lions, 4-game winning, or 4-1, right? Or I guess 5-1 now. But, like, he can't, like, control how the Lions do after he leaves. And the Vikings had the same record, right? Heading into the game, 4-1, as the Lions since that trade. And so, like, yeah, it feels nice to be winning. Maybe it doesn't happen with the Lions, but that doesn't mean he thinks the Lions are doomed or that Campbell's a bad coach. But, he wasn't used to winning. That's, like, not a shot. That's, like, true. I don't know how else to put it. And that's, like, of all the, like, I've seen players burn bridges when they get, like, Mike Wallace would burn previous teams when he got traded, right? Like, we see this happen all the time. And Hawkinson didn't do that. He thanked the fans when he was traded. He didn't demand a trade or anything like that. He was traded essentially against his will. Like, my understanding is that if he wanted to, if he had a choice about whether or not he was going to get traded, he was going to decline, right? So, very unusual situation. I can't really explain it.
I was watching it and I admittedly was a little confused, but like, this wasn't like Culpepper, who basically got himself out of town with a bunch of like complaining to newspapers. Like, This wasn't this. This was him not wanting to necessarily leave. The Lions just didn't have anything for him. They're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
the draft pick is going to be worth more than him right now, so let's go with that. Like, you're really going to boo this guy? Come on.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Are you booing the potential that he didn't that he didn't like grasp, that he didn't like fulfill
But
in
then you
Detroit?
would boo him. Then you would boo him when he was on the field for the Lions. They didn't do that. In fact, he had his highest yards per game with the Lions that season.
Yeah. So again, it didn't make any sense. The only thing that made less sense than that was whatever the hell was happening on commentary. This, oh my God. If I can take a moment and rant for a bit. Jonathan Vilma needs to have all microphones taken away from him within like a 50-mile radius. Please. He was literally, not figuratively, literally comparing the greatest show on turf multiple times
Very weird.
to this Lions offense, saying basically, you know, if they were better, we would be talking about them like the greatest show on turf.
Yeah, very weird.
It's like, what are you doing?
Very weird.
I don't understand. I don't get it.
I don't recall a well commentated game from Vilma.
My thing is that this started because I have to assume that Collinsworth saw the game, because Collinsworth went off later at night.
That's right. Yeah, there was more greatest show on turf.
This was the greatest show on turf night. Like, did Kurt Warner like need a little bit of like a pick me up or something? Did all the announcers just
Kurt
decide?
Warner's like already in the Hall of Fame, right? Like he doesn't need. Which, by the way, weird, but okay, fine.
Like, was a good enough story. You got your Super Bowl, fine. Had one hell of a career like comeback once you left the Giants, but like, yeah, still weird.
Mm-hmm.
Man, anyway. Jonathan Vilma, dying of fire. Like, I can't stand listening to him, and like Vikings fans already have like issues with Vilma because of his role in 2009.
You don't say.
But like, that said, dude, shut up, please.
Yeah, it's definitely like when people get upset at Joe Buck now, a lot of it, especially for Vikings fans, is tinged by, you know, what a disgusting act Randy Moss or whatever, right? Which my understanding is that he probably doesn't think that anymore, but irrelevant, right? You're not really evaluating. And there are a lot of people who don't like him based off of like the way that he commentates. But again, I feel like that's more historical, because I think now he's grown enough as a commentator, and Sam Ekstrom will defend him to the end of the earth. But the last couple of years, I thought Joe Buck has done a really, really good job. And I think that a lot of the criticism for him
Diggs, sideline, touchdown.
Yeah, right. Like some iconic calls, right? And I think a lot of the criticism of him is based off of an old version of his broadcasting and some leftover dissatisfaction, let's say, with the way that he reacted to Randy Moss mooning the Packers, without having, you know, kind of the full story for why Randy Moss did that and what the Packers were doing to him on the way in and the way out. You know, that kind of thing, right? I shouldn't say the Packers fans. So, you know, I get that. But here with Jonathan Vilma, I think just fewer people care about his role or alleged role in Bountygate, and more people just care that it's just like not good commentary. It's bad. It's tough to listen to. It feels like you're learning less about the game. It feels like you have to unlearn what he says in order for you to enjoy football. Just all the things that you don't want in a commentator.
I mean, at least he wasn't sitting there talking about the wind changing directions inside of the dome like we had earlier this year.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was like,
you
what the hell?
That? There we go. I'm glad I could bring back that nightmare for you. I forget if that was Brady Quinn or if that was somebody else, but yeah, that was awful.
Just, like, again, brain busting.
Just
and the thing is, like, they are not watching a television feed and then discuss, like, if you watch the television feed, you might forget that it's being played in a dome, or you're watching, you might see like the Vikings, and you're not like processing in your head, oh, well, they're at home and the Vikings play in a dome. I should think that it's, I should consider that it's in a dome. Sometimes you're just watching football on a field and you just say something, right? And you might not, because you're not there, you might not be able to do, but they're physically there. They physically travel to the game. You are actually in the giant stadium. You have to walk into it to get there. Hard to miss. It kind of dominates its area of the skyline. And when you're in there, again, hard to miss that you're in a building and do not feel wind. I can't stress enough that they are there.
Yeah, but those big doors. Those
big doors.
Big doors.
Yeah, watch that. Yeah.
Just, oh my God, ridiculous. Yeah, by the way, we were both wrong. The Viking Stadium is being paid off this year, apparently. Thanks to e-pull tabs.
Oh, wow. They did it.
Yeah. we were both wrong on that one. The debate on that was hilarious at best, and it turns out that the gamblers won. In this case, they mostly lost, but yeah, it just the stadium's getting paid off this year, like 15 years early. Good for them. So let's wrap this up. There's not much to talk about as far as the offense is concerned, because they couldn't do anything other than Justin Jefferson was just coming down with everything. Like, he obviously destroyed his previous record against the Lions last game, going from the worst in his career to the most. But was there something in particular that just made him more successful against the Lions this time around?
Well, I mean, there's like a couple of things, right? So first, I find it like he averaged 118.5 yards per game against the Lions this year. Very funny to think of it like that, because that is higher than his season average of 115. He's like perfectly at 115. Okay, that's how many yards he got this game. That's crazy. So a couple of things. One is that Jeff Okudah is coming off of an illness and he didn't play every snap. That's like a really, really important element of this. So the Lions could not play the normal defense. Let's take a look at the coverage matchups for the Lions real quick just to see. So Jefferson was lined up against Mike Hughes on 4 of his targets and also 4 of his receptions for 79 yards. That was a big part of it. He was also lined up against the Okudah replacement, or not the Okudah replacement. I guess the second cornerback, Jerry Jacobs, for 4 targets, 2 receptions for a total of 53 yards. He was up against Amani Warrior, who essentially was benched because of the Vikings game in week 3 for 2 targets, 2 catches, and 51 yards. He was up against safety Deshaun Elliott for 1 target, 1 catch, 20 yards, and against linebacker Malcolm Rodriguez for 1 target, no catches. And up against Jeffrey Okudah for 1 target, 1 catch, 10 yards. A lot of it was that he was able to get away from Okudah because of and Anthony Pittman, linebacker, 1 target, 1 catch, 10 yards. A lot of it was because he was able to get away from Okudah because Okudah was in and out of the lineup. A lot of it was because they were running route combinations that made it very difficult for them to do kind of the bracketing that they were normally doing. Like, they would run at the safety that would typically bracket Jefferson in double coverage. They would do a better job kind of feeding the ball elsewhere in those situations. They would do a pretty good job of making sure that Jefferson had a clean release. They'd put him in motion a little bit more, just make it really difficult to double him, because the issue was less that Okudah was playing lights out football. He was, right? I'm not trying to get rid of that, but rather the issue was not that he was playing lights out football, but that he was doing that at the same time he had help, right? At the beginning of the season, someone asked me if there's a shutdown corner that could take away Justin Jefferson. I said no. And then, of course, weeks 2 and 3, Jefferson just doesn't have very many yards because of Darius Slay and Jeff Okudah, but they were doubled, right? You didn't have the one-on-one coverage. The closest thing I think that the Vikings have seen this year is Sauce Gardner, and he doesn't shadow, so you didn't have to worry about that. because of the change in cornerback and because of the change in route concepts, it was just a lot easier. I mean, they said going into the game, and this one was actually more interesting to me than Jalen Rager's promise or guarantee, I should say, that they had something in mind to get Jefferson more yards in this game. And Jesus Christ, did they ever have something in mind?
Yeah, as it turned out, yes, absolutely, they really did. It was beautiful to watch. I have this theory, and it's supported by at least 2 games, that when the Vikings break like a major team record and even a national record, they lose the game. I immediately think to Adrian Peterson and his performance where he got the most rushing yards and still has the most rushing yards of any player in an NFL game. And they lost that game.
Wasn't that against the Chargers?
That sure was.
Yeah.
The Chargers also that day had the longest,
Longest
they still
return.
do.
It was Antonio Cromartie, right?
Yep, that had the longest play in NFL history. It's the return for like 109 3/4. Yeah.
The longest play that one could physically have in an NFL game. Yeah.
Yes. And they lost that one. And this one, Justin Jefferson, most yards ever as a Viking with receiver. Yeah, lost it. So maybe the lesson here is much like Icarus. You need to be careful when going up, when scoring here, not to go too close to the sun.
Yeah. Yeah, the Vikings are actually a lot like Icarus, I guess. If the sun is the Lombardi trophy,
yes,
then yeah, absolutely.
You will absolutely melt your wax wings and plummet to your death. Yeah, that's we went from magic to myths. I'm actually okay with this.
That's better, yeah.
Yeah, it's somewhat better anyway. All right, let's go to the mailbag, and there's a couple of great questions in here. First one, however, is from Jeremy Reisman, who asks, which punter in the Lions-Vikings game had more net yards per punt on Sunday?
So Jeremy seems like to think that I'm personally obsessed with punters, and certainly I am more interested in punters than the typical analyst, right? Like that's just, I'm weird, right? Like that's true, but I'm not like so invested in punters that I spend a ton of time talking about them. Like Ryan Wright's having a phenomenal season. We don't talk about it that much on the podcast because it is just punting. But I like Jack Fox a lot, right? The Lions punter. And he appeared quite often back when I was doing Players of the Week for The Athletic. He appeared quite often as the punter I would feature that week. So that was his rookie year. He hasn't played as well as he had that rookie year. But, I've just taken a particular liking to him. He does a really good job. He also very much recognizes that the Lions should go for it on 4th down a ton. He talks about it a lot. I think that's cool too. So, I bring him up whenever he's a guest on the show. I'm like, hey, how's Jack Fox doing? Hey, kind of weird that you didn't use the best player on your team, Jack Fox. Right? It's just kind of a joke. I don't really care that much, but because he asked, I did look it up. Jack Fox had about 5 more yards net per punt than Ryan Wright, which is a pretty significant difference. So, I mean, you win this one again, Jack Fox.
I mean, the punter can be the best player on your team. The kicker is clearly the best player on the Ravens. So
yeah, right. I mean, not even close.
It is amazing to think he is in fact the franchise leader in points there. It's absurd. Kurt asks, why hasn't the Vikings defense tried implementing a 12th man on the field? It's been incredibly successful against the Vikings this season when utilized.
Yeah, I guess it's happened at least twice this year, right?
Yes.
Maybe I'm missing one. Yeah. And I don't think it's been called either time. So.
Neither. You are correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, you take the best strategies that your opponent develops and use them against future opponents. That's just kind of how football works.
Yeah. Tommy Gunn asks, what percentage of defensive plays did Hunter and or Smith drop into coverage, and what was the difference, if any, versus those that were a straight rush?
So I looked this up. In the game, I don't know if you're asking for season long or the game, but it sounds like the game. The percentage of dropbacks from Hunter was 15.6% of all passing plays that Hunter saw. For Zadarius Smith, it was 6.5% of all passing plays that Smith saw. This was in line with Smith's season-long averages, about 6.6%. It was about triple Hunter's season-long average of 5.5%. I've made my thoughts on this pretty clear in a couple of episodes. Doesn't bother me that much when an edge rusher just happens to be dropping back in coverage, a little bit more than you'd expect. That's just part of playing in a 5-man defense or a 5-front defense, 5-person front on defense. You're not going to be rushing 5 all the time, and sometimes you'd rather have the linebackers in coverage than the defensive tackles. That's again, not an issue, but something to keep in mind when taking a look at like pressures and pass rushing rates and so on.
Damian Barrett asks, if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results, what does the use of Cook say about Kevin O'Connell's mental state of mind? I know run plays tend to build an impact, but yesterday seemed especially jarring, given the success of the passing game.
Yeah, I think it's especially given the success of the passing, like the disparity between how successful the run game was and how successful the passing game was. Like, typically that disparity is pretty large anyway, and it was astronomical in this game. Again, we could be over-remembering the amount of runs. If we were complaining live on Twitter how every single time they ran, how often they would run, and after-the-fact analysis would maybe tell us they didn't run as much as we thought, but still kind of surprising. So I don't know. But I will say on passing downs, more often than not, I'd probably rather have Cook on the field than Madison. So at least there's a use for Cook in those situations. But I mean, did they run the ball too much? Yes. Did they run the ball too much when accounting for situation? Yes. Is it that dramatic? I guess not. But certainly they could have placed some of those runs with passes and been better off.
I'm thinking of that Cook play near the goal line that looked like it was going to turn into a Cook pass.
It was officially logged as a drop back for Dalvin Cook. It was a sack.
God. And I realized this was something that the announcers were talking about, getting cute with it. But was there literally nothing else they could have called there? It seemed like the Lions defense knew immediately what was about to happen.
Yeah, I think Sam made this point on the Football Machine that we only care about it when it doesn't work. And for the most part, the rest of everything did work. Like Johnny Munt got open, right? That he was there. Lions fans are not upset that they motioned Penei Sewell out on a somewhat critical third down to convert for a passing play because it worked, right? And so it's easier to kind of criticize after the fact. And Luke made the point that Ed Ingram got absolutely demolished on the play, which had it not been a Dalvin Cook pass, would still have ruined the play, right? Like if he plays poorly, that's just going to be an issue for you kind of regardless. Now, in that situation, I guess I'd much rather have Kirk Cousins in there than Dalvin Cook in a situation where, your right guard gets blown up, just because quarterbacks tend to be able to navigate the pocket as passers a little bit better than running backs. That's kind of why they're the quarterback. But, I don't know that it actually was too cute. That's probably the time in the game where you need to be cute anyway. Like, being cute up 40, what are you doing? You're just giving away your gimmick plays. Being cute down 40, what are you doing? You're just going to lose the game. You're giving away your gimmick plays. Being cute up 7, higher risk than reward, not worth it. Being cute down 7, yeah, okay. Well, you're already losing the game. You might as well try some high-risk strategies to get back into it. So I get it. From a sequencing standpoint, probably better to run the ball first, just because there wasn't a bunch of time left on the clock, and you could have drained the clock so that you could have prevented the Lions from driving down the field for a field goal, although, again, probably contingent upon a turnover. But yeah, you could have drained the clock a little bit with a run and then had the fake run pass. But they were probably expecting a run, which is when you want to do that anyway. So it was just poor execution, probably.
Just seemed wrong.
Yes,
Munt definitely did get open.
you're wide open.
Ugh. Just annoyed. This game was. I had tweeted out right before the game. Like, this was going to be the dumbest game of the day, and I don't know if I was necessarily right, but I felt vindicated after the third dumb thing happened. Where it was like, okay, yep, this is just what's going to end up happening. Every NFL season has like 1 week where it seems like all the teams that shouldn't win do win, and you're just kind of stuck with it. And enough dumb plays happened that the Lions were able to pull it off, and good for them. They looked impressive. They looked every bit of the like rising potential. Was it lurking? What did they show on the screen tonight on Monday Night Football for those like wild card teams that were like in the hunt?
Right, they wanted to stop using in the hunt.
They were loitering. That was the term
Yeah,
they used loitering.
Right.
Really?
They're like, wait, that's like a legal term, right? Like,
yeah, they need to leave the quick stop, man. It's like, really? So they looked every bit the loiterer. Boy, that's not something that instills fear. They looked every bit the potential loiterer into the NFC wildcard race. Oh, God, that's terrible. Raul asks, first, is there any evidence that early bye weeks lead to more injury burden by the end of the season?
So I looked this up. It was actually surprisingly difficult to look up. And by surprisingly difficult, I mean that when I put in, what should have been the right Google phrase, it did not pop up in the first 10 results, which is weird to me. But I was able to find it eventually within 5 minutes. So it wasn't like spectacularly difficult, but really annoying to find out. So Scorigami Sports did a study on this. Study, again, probably too strong of a word given what a study is in an academic sense, but they looked at it from a data perspective. It seemed like their methodology was relatively sound, and certainly I've read some of their work before, and it seems like their methodology is fine. So they accumulated multiple years of data. They excluded the bye weeks that occurred in week 1, which usually, like a storm or something like that, or week 13, because which has only appeared in these like 17 game seasons, because only 6 bye weeks have occurred during those weeks. So when you include that, there does not seem to be any correlation between a team's bye week and injury designations. I'll link the article in the show notes so you can kind of read it a little bit more in depth. But roughly speaking, you take a look at the injuries per bye week, and they did it both in terms of subsequent player games missed as well as appearances on the injury list, probable, questionable, doubtful, etc. Which, the NFL has gotten rid of the probable designation. Again, just something you have to account for. And you take a look at that data, and it looks fairly random. So that one kind of makes sense. And then I also saw another article from The Athletic back in 2019. According to NFL injury data, there's little correlation between the number of days off between games and the rate of injury, meaning that the risk of injury for a Thursday game after only 3 days of rest, a hotly contested point, is virtually equal to that of the bye week's 13 days of rest. And I know that the injury impact of Thursday Night Football has been talked about a lot, and the data seems to suggest that it is a pretty small impact. But when I saw that a couple of years ago being discussed, someone made the very good point that the players that are at the highest risk of injury often do not play in Thursday night games, which diminish the impact that you'll see in the data. Like, the coaches could be minimizing the injury output anyway, and this is something that has essentially already reached equilibrium, but it impacts the quality of play on Thursday. So, it seems likely that a bye week is going to help you more, right? Because you've got those days of rest and you're just more likely to play players as a result of that. I don't know if there's a way to account for that statistically, but the data that we have suggests that when the bye week occurs, does not seem to impact injury rates, perhaps because teams that detect that players that need load lightening will then find other ways to do that, either by decreasing practice reps or, say, in Christian Darrisaw's case, not even playing them in a game and giving them an effect a bye week, which reduces the team's quality of play. I did, and I didn't save this link. I did see a while back a link on like Stack Exchange where someone looked at the Super Bowl percentages of teams by bye week, but that is like Super Bowl wins is such a low frequency event. Obviously, only one happens per year, that it is very weird to construct a data set out of it. You're just not going to have an appropriate sample size. But that one did suggest that like week 10 or something, or the middle of the season, was the best time because that's when most Super Bowl champions appeared. I don't know. That one seems dumber, but that one at least accounts for the possibility that teams are strategically resting players or reducing the practice time, which in theory reduces your readiness and capability for the game in other ways, in order to accommodate the fact that they don't have a bye week. So I don't know.
Also from Raul, what is our explosive plays given up rate on 2 high versus single high? And how would you adjust your approach based off of this data?
So I took a look at this by using the PFF data for cover 2, cover 4, cover 6, and 2-man as 2 high, and cover 1, cover 3 as 1 high, or single high, I should say. Incidentally, the Vikings play more cover 6 than anyone in the league, according to PFF. Not something that'll surprise anybody that has kind of paid attention to these particular types of discussions. They also play an extraordinarily small amount of cover 1 and cover 0. Cover 0 is when you just don't have a safety up top and when you blitz a bunch of people. And everybody else is in man coverage. Okay, cool. So I looked at that and I took a look at, first of all, obviously the totals are not going to help us very much. The Vikings have given up more total explosive plays in cover 1 or in single high than in 2 high. But almost every team in the league does. So we do have to look at it in terms of percentage. The Vikings, like every team in the league right now, play a ton of cover 3. My contention is that they should play a lot more, and the percentage of cover 3 is indeed significantly lower than everybody else's. They play cover 3 in about 29.6% of their coverage snaps. That, from my understanding, is the third lowest in the league, maybe the fourth lowest. I'm just doing a quick eyeball of that. But the percentage in cover 2 of explosive plays, which here is defined as 20 plus yards, they rank 28th in percentage of explosive plays given up in cover 2. Just like pure, like they just rank 28th, right? They rank, I want to take a quick look, 5th in percentage of plays given up in cover 1 that are explosive. And here a higher ranking is bad. They have the 5th most as a percentage of play versus 28th most as a percentage of play. If you take a look at just generally the average percentage given up in 2 high is 5.1%. The average in 1 high is 5.3%. So virtually identical. So the difference here is pretty meaningful for the Vikings, who do play, again, less cover 1, or I guess single high. I should stop saying cover 1. Single high than cover 2. So I was like, okay, well, those are the explosives. What about the yards per attempt? So I looked at that. And the average in 2 high in yards per attempt league-wide is 7.18. The average in cover 1 league or single high league-wide is 7.6. So you are just more likely to give up more yards per attempt in single high coverages. And there's a reason for that that I'm going to get to in a second when I discuss EPA. But for now, the Vikings give up about 3/4 of a yard more per attempt in single high. Okay, well, what about in EPA, which accounts for things like down and distance and position on the field? The Vikings, unsurprisingly, rank pretty poorly in EPA regardless, right? So they give up the 10th most EPA in 2 high. They give up the 11th most EPA in 1 high. They actually give up more expected points per drop back in 2 high than they do in 1 high, despite the fact that they give up more explosives in 1 high and more yards in 1 high. And I think the reason for this is kind of what I wanted to circle all the way back to. And maybe there's a way to account for this in the data when I do a second look, but this is just for a podcast question. So I didn't do a ton of research into this. But I think the reason for this is that teams, and especially the Vikings, are much more likely to have a single high coverage on 3rd down where you can give up a lot of yards without it hurting you. So if you give up 7 yards on 3rd and 8, that's good. I mean, obviously, if a team is likely to go for it on 4th down, like let's say the Lions, that's not necessarily good. But for the most part, you would consider that a success. You have hurt your yards per attempt, but have helped your EPA. The second reason I think has to do with red zone. Teams are just much more likely to run too high or more than too high in the red zone. Now, PFF does have a designation specifically for red zone and goal line, but very often when you're in the red zone, the PFF designation will match cover 2 or cover 4. So the teams run a lot more. And so you will give up fewer explosives because there's just not as many yards to gain. So a big play is going to get a touchdown without getting 20 yards. And you will give up fewer yards, just generally, right? Just for the same reason. So your yards per attempt can be lower, right? Which again, most teams' yards per attempt in too high is just lower. But your EPA can be higher because you're giving up those touchdowns. So difficult to draw many conclusions from this. I would say that the Vikings, because they give up more explosives in cover 1 by a dramatic amount, both compared to the rest of the league and compared to their too high stuff, should probably continue doing too high stuff. I think the issue is not that they have too high safeties. I think the issue is how they play too high. You can have too high coverages that spin Harrison Smith down into the box, right? You've got cover 2 invert. You've got some versions of cover 6 that have 2 corners and a safety, right? You've got the possibility of having your slot corner play safety on some snaps, again, by inverting in some situations. And you can shift cover 3, cover 4, or you can do what the Pittsburgh Steelers did with Troy Polamalu a lot, which is nominally play a lot of cover 4. But Troy Polamalu just does whatever he wants, and everyone just has to account for that. I think you could do that with Harrison Smith, and you'd probably be fine. So Polamalu would abandon his assignment all the time, and it worked. It was a good idea. He should have done it as often as he did.
I'm reminded of the Pat McAfee 100%er conversation.
Oh my God, I totally forgot about that.
I just felt like lining up on that side of the ball that day.
Yeah. How did you know I was going to? I just felt like it.
I just wanted to be on that side for that one kick.
God, brutal.
How do you do that? It's just amazing. There's a reason he's a Hall of Famer. He was a lone wolf out there.
Yeah, and I think you can do that with Harrison Smith, and they should. But so I would not change my approach based off of this data. I would change my approach based off of other elements of data, like, for example, the fact that the Vikings run a very simplistic and basic coverage compared to the rest of the league.
Next question is from Samuel, who asks, realistically, how fast can we improve our defense? Is it possible for a few scheme changes to make it like league average by the postseason, or is this going to be a multi-year fix?
League average? That is a tough ask by the postseason. Is it possible? Yeah, probably. It's probably possible. But if it's possible, the chances are still low, even if you've got a really good defensive coordinator, which seems like the Vikings don't. But if they were to do it, I would imagine, not a super expert here, I would imagine that would involve not just making sure that the defenses that they call happen to be more complex, but actually doing stuff to get into that single high stuff that I just said to stay away from a little bit more often, but within the element of disguise, right? When the Vikings run single high stuff, there's not a lot of there's always disguise. It's just the way this particular defense works. But it seems like they kind of give the game away with a particular tell. Usually because it's on 3rd down very often or obvious passing situations. They move their linebackers back a little bit, that kind of stuff, right? I think they should be a little bit better about it, or spin into a late cover, a single high stuff, right? Like have your fake too high safety trigger a little bit later in the snap against the middle of the field type stuff and be a single high robber or something. I think there are ways to do it and increase the complexity of the defense over the course of the next few weeks that make it a little bit more difficult to resolve. But I would think that even with a good coordinator, the chances are pretty low that you can make it a league average defense by the time you get around to the postseason. So I would say do not get your hopes up. it is probably a multiple year fix, not just because you need to infuse some talent. Certainly you have to do that. But because the coordinator has to feel comfortable teaching the more complex versions of this defense, essentially, to the players with the knowledge that now that they've got the foundations of the defense, they can kind of layer on top of it. It's the same thing that happened with Zimmer in 2014. The 2015 and 2014 defenses looked fairly different, and the 2015 defense was astoundingly better than the 2014 defense, which already was a pretty big sea change from 2013 when I think they were ranked like 30th in a lot of metrics.
Ingram's left foot asks, Wright's physique was an odd focus of Lions Twitter yesterday. We haven't heard any thirst speech from Daniels yet about his punter, so do we think he's just not into dad bods, or did he finally go to horny jail?
I don't think he went to horny jail. I think that, we're going to get it later in the season, maybe later in the week, later in the season.
When he gets elected to the Pro Bowl?
Yeah, exactly. By the way, he ended up becoming the focus of Lions Twitter just because someone tweeted out, hey, for some reason this guy's on the sideline, and he did just look like a dude wearing official Vikings gear, right? Like he's like some guy wearing Stephon Diggs' jersey just on the sideline, and Kevin O'Connell just does not seem to mind like that this guy is here. What are you doing, man? No, that was Ryan Wright. This punter is one of the best punters in the league right now. But a lot of people, most people don't recognize punters. So a lot of Lions fans are like, what is happening over here? Who are you letting play football? That's not a lineman. He's wearing 14. That can't be a lineman. But I know that's not a receiver.
I want to see Ryan Wright go out to catch.
I
want to see him run a route.
Yeah.
Durf asks, for James's relationship corner, if Luke Braun and Luke Braun 2.0, allegedly a reef and a Luke Braun mask, get divorced, who becomes a Packers fan despite the other?
Okay, well, first of all, we don't even know that this Luke Braun 2.0 exists. I contend that it's all Luke Braun. Mm-hmm. And then if you hear any crimes committed by Luke Braun 2.0, remember, that's just Luke Braun in a cheap Luke Braun mask. I would... Were they different people? Luke Braun 2.0 seems a little bit more, I'd say, destructive, a little bit more spiteful, and so is more likely to become the Packers fan. But again, all Luke Braun.
Yeah. Hey, don't hate on that mask. I spent minutes of my time making that thing perfect. So, for the record, Ed Donatello asks, given how banged up our team has been for about the last month, should we consider benching all of our starters until the last game against the Bears?
It feels like flirting with disaster. The Vikings have not locked in the 2 seed or even the division yet. They should do that first. It is extremely likely the Vikings not only win the division, but also lock in the 2 seed. Essentially, they'd have to lose out and the Lions would have to win out. It'd be the only way that the Vikings don't get the division, right? But it's possible. And until that happens, they should be able to have 2 home games. They should aim for that. So no. But as soon as they lock it up, they should start resting some of their older players, for sure. Or more injured players, even.
Mayo Coffee asks, do you think Kevin O'Connell has failed to coach up his players in a manner that allows them to play complementary football, do the little things, and execute in critical moments? I'd like to also add, and to ensure that the team is really using their intangibles out there.
Yeah. I can't tell if this question is like just making fun of coach speak. It has to be. Also, no. Clearly, they are executing in critical moments. That's like the whole thing, right? That's the only time they seem to execute.
that's their thing, apparently. That situational masters thing they like to talk about
all the time.
Ben Greenhagen asks, Justin Jefferson is now up to number 9 in most receiving yards in his first 4 years. With 21 games to go, how early in 2023 will he break that record? Are there lessons from OBJ's year 4 we should worry about?
Well, okay, so I'll answer that second one first. the lessons from OBJ year 4 are to not get hurt. That's like really important to making, because like Odell Beckham was on pace to get the year 4 record. Like in his first 4 years, he only played 47 games because he missed the beginning of his rookie year and almost the entirety of his 4th year. So he only ended up playing 47, looks like 47 games. And he ranked at the time, because what was that, 2017? He ranked behind Justin Jefferson, but ahead of, he ranked 9th on the list, just like Justin Jefferson. But since then, Michael Thomas and Justin Jefferson have appeared on the scene. Strangely, Michael Thomas is number 1 on the list. Number 2 is Randy Moss. Number 3 is Torrey Holt. Number 4 is Jerry Rice. And number 5 is AJ Green. And at the top, for some reason, is Michael Thomas. That's a little bit weird. But, there you go. So, number 1, don't get hurt. Really important to the whole thing. Number 2, Odell Beckham is not a wonderful comparator to Jefferson because Beckham decreased his yards per game every single year that he was in the NFL for the first 4 years, right? So it went from like 100 plus to like 98 to 88 to 76 or something along those lines. Like it decreased pretty dramatically. As for how long it would take for Jefferson to get there, just quickly doing the math, it looks like it would take about 10 more games. Technically, 9 and change, right? But it would take about 10 more games for him to get there. Well, there's 4 more games left in the season. I'm doing my math right. Yeah, 4 more games left in the season. Let's say he plays in all 4 of those games. Let's say they don't throw away week 18 or whatever it is, right? So he plays all 4 games. So there are 6 games left at his 98 yards per game pace. Now, again, he's increasing his yards per game with the Vikings every year, not decreasing. He's increasing it, which is wild considering how great his rookie year was. So he would do it in week 6, or if they have like a week 5 or a week 6 by week 7. But he would do it 6 games into the 2023 season with 11 more games left to go. That's pretty crazy. And I thought the fact that he was 9th on the list was a pretty mind-blowing stat. But I actually started like teasing it out to see if everybody had played 64 games, right? Which in the 16-game schedule is what you get, right? That's, the 64 games, right? Now, the number of players who've played 64 games in the first 4 seasons is actually pretty low. If I take a look at the most yardage list, only 5 of the top 20 played in 64 games. Now, Michael Thomas played 63, so that's pretty close. But primarily, it's really difficult to play 64 games. But I paced everyone out to 64 games, right? Michael Thomas, if he had played in all 64, would be at 5,600 yards, right? Randy Moss, obviously, would be at the yards that he's at, which is 5,396. Cool. So I looked at that, and I looked at where Justin Jefferson would rank. Now, he would rank number 1. That's pretty clear because he has the most yards per game out of this entire group. Okay, fine. He ranked number 1. He is the highest at the list of any third-year player, and he's in the top 10 despite missing out on an entire season. That is a nuts statistic. Holy crap, that's really cool. But when you look at the totals, that's when it gets cuckoo bananas. Number 1 in NFL history, again, Michael Thomas, 5,512 yards. Justin Jefferson will be at 6,284.8. So let's say 6,285 yards once he gets to game 64. Michael Thomas, 5,500. That is a difference of 773 yards. That's like he would outpace the number 1 in league history by 773 yards. And Randy Moss, he would outpace Randy Moss by, a guy who I hear ended up being pretty good, 889 yards. That is a half a season. A good season. Half of a good season. That's why he would have another half season on the greatest receiver in Vikings history, perhaps the greatest receiver in history, depending on where you fall in that debate, in the first 4 years of play by a full half season, lapping the field. That's crazy, man. By the time you get to year 6, you'll have more yards than people in year 8, than the most productive receivers in NFL history through year 8. That is unfathomable. And he's about to break 100 yards a game. He's at 98.2, and this season he's averaged 115. He is really close to breaking 100 yards per game.
Dude is getting paid.
He's getting paid. And like, so you mentioned in the pre-show that Chris Carter had mentioned that Justin Jefferson is already on his way, or is already, right? I don't remember.
Is
already the best receiver in Vikings history. Now, of course, Chris Carter has a particular insight into that question.
Just slightly.
I think he is lying. I don't think he believes that. But the fact that he doesn't believe that doesn't make it not true. I don't know. I don't know what to do with this. This is crazy. It's like it's blasphemous to compare him to Randy Moss. I think we can, compare him to Chris Carter, but it is blasphemous to compare him to Randy Moss. But man, there's a lot of Randy Moss showing up on these lists, and it's not above him. That's crazy, man.
When I read the news of that, my only thought was, so he spoke to Justin Jefferson and or his agent, and they're planting the seeds on the whole like getting paid thing.
Yeah, he's helping Jefferson buy a team.
Yeah, he's not looking at running back money. He's not looking at Aaron Rodgers money. He's looking at Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. He's like, I need money in percentages of billions.
Yes, let's figure this out. Oh god, that's gonna be fun to report on. Let's go with that. Trill Swaggets asks, is it possible that Donatel has an undiagnosed phobia where he is afraid of his players getting too close to opposing players? This would explain the open passing lanes and the lack of blitzing, similar to claustrophobia, hapophobia, or inoculophobia, but manifested on the players. Now, hapophobia is, I believe, that was the one of being too close.
No, that's the fear of touching.
Yep. Fear of touching, fear of being too close, and then inoculophobia is the fear of being in groups.
Yeah, crowds.
Yes.
Now, admittedly, neither James nor I knew what those second two were. We Googled it. We denied you the Googling ASMR. But yeah, let's say yes. I mean, it is an interesting combination of things where
it would explain a lot.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination of things where not only do they not blitz very often, but they do give wide receivers a pretty enormous cushion. That's a good point.
It's very possible. Also from Trill Swaggets, he says, based on the Jalen Phillips roughing call, should a rule be instituted where if a quarterback has been engaged by a defender, they're just automatically down? There have been multiple instances this season where a defender will, quote, give up on a play, only to have the QB break the pocket and throw.
I get it. I understand that is fairer to defenders for the purposes of accomplishing their goals, which, that's usually how you evaluate these things. But I say no. I say it's actually not fair enough to defenders. They deserve the satisfaction of hitting quarterbacks. I think they should get to absolutely demolish these guys. But I feel like quarterbacks should play football. It's like a very old school version of saying this, but I can't get away from the fact that's the fundamental appeal of the sport, right? Watching quarterbacks spin dimes 40 yards downfield right in the bucket for a touchdown, that rules. That absolutely rules. But anyone who likes football does like big hits, even if we're now a little bit uncomfortable with what the implications of those big hits might be, especially when they involve the head, right? But a lot of it is just hits. And exempting the most important position in football from the fear of getting hit sounds stupid as hell to me. that sounds so dumb, and it sounds not football. Like as much as I talk about how this is like, yeah, as much as like this podcast is like deep level analysis and being a nerd and going over spreadsheets and kind of seeing what the numbers tell us and, ways to maximize play, and in many ways also kind of trying to remove our initial emotional responses from the game. It is a game. It is entertainment. Like the point is to enjoy it, even if I've lost that years ago. I would like quarterbacks to get clocked. I can't get over that. So you're right that would be like a fair way to preserve quarterback safety and still allow defenders to get credit for sacks and force like second and longs and stuff like that. But I would rather adjust the rule so that you could hit quarterbacks again. I mean, that seems normal to me.
Last night's quote unquote roughing the passer.
Yeah, that was the Jalen Phillips play. I can't.
So bad.
As he's falling to the ground, he is bracing himself. He's falling on.
He's doing
his
doing a push-up. It looked like he was bracing for a push-up.
Exactly. I was exactly about to say he was doing a push-up. Right, he falls into a push-up position to protect the quarterback from his body falling on him. And that's so dumb. That's so dumb. So, like, you could, like, the compromise solution here, if you're going to change the rule, which you should, right? The compromise solution to change the rule is to only throw the flag when you are 100% sure that the defender did not attempt to brace themselves or reduce the impact of the fall, right? Instead of throwing the flag when you think the defender did, throw the flag only when you think the defender did not, right? So change the presumption, essentially. So penalize the defender if you cannot be sure that they didn't try to do that, right? And that will basically have the same effect as the point of emphasis memoranda for like holding or whatever that happen every year, right? Our point of emphasis is crown of the helmet hits, right? Our point of emphasis is defensive holding 5 yards down the field, right? This would have essentially the same effect by changing what the presumption is for seeing a hit, right? But honestly, I just get rid of the rule. I hate it. I've hated that rule.
It's so dumb. And last night in particular, there was nothing you could have done. The hit against Mike White.
Yeah, that one was worse. And that was by the rule. That was totally legal, right? And it absolutely demolished him. I mean, again, I feel for White. Ribs, man, that's just going to hurt for a long time. He had to go to the hospital. That, like, is scary. But I cannot deny that hit absolutely ruled. I loved watching it. That's just like part of it, right? Like, you can't, like, at some point you have to acknowledge that football is at some level a combat sport. Not like boxing, kickboxing, UFC. Those are like combat sports in the truest sense of the word. But in the sense that there are adults consenting to a fight. Like, if we're okay with combat sports, and many people are not, but if we're okay with combat sports, we should be okay with absolutely spearing these quarterbacks until they go to the hospital. That's just kind of where you're at. And I think you might even get fewer quarterback injuries in this because they are now forced into a position where they're attempting to spin quarterbacks into the ground that results in them being thrown to the ground, right? And in a way that is more legal than what they're doing now because they cannot tackle through quarterbacks. They can tackle through running backs and wide receivers, and they have to change their tackling approach when they get to a quarterback, which I think, like, that sucks, right? Keep the stuff that protects the quarterback's head, right? Like, losing your identity because you have had a ton of concussions, that is astronomically worse than separating your shoulder, right? For a quarterback, like, it probably doesn't feel like that, especially for Andrew Luck, right? But, like, I bet Luck is happier now that he has his brain than that he doesn't have his shoulder, right? Versus vice versa, right? So, yeah, I mean, keep those, right? Maybe make it so that you can't make it so that you can slam a quarterback's head into the ground. That's fine. But, like, just get rid of the rule. It sucks.
Next question is from Brian Jellerson, who asks, having my name featured in a corner is both flattering and unsettling. But
Oh, is it? Oh, is it? Is it, Brian? Is that the case?
for the me matrix trans allegorical battery something something corner,
It's your corner. You can use something something. You made it up.
which of the following scenarios will have the most efficient hope/heartbreak energy output? Going undefeated for the rest of the season and getting knocked out in the first round of the playoffs, or going 500 but making it to the NFC Championship game only to get blown out by the Eagles again?
This is such a good question, because if you go 500 for the rest of the season, you do short circuit the Vikings like fans' hopium, I guess. Like the amount of hope that they have is significantly mediated by the fact that they went 500 for the rest of the season, going 2-2, especially when it's not a great schedule coming up. Or I should say it's a good schedule for the Vikings. It's not a great schedule of upcoming opponents in terms of where they are in the season. Just like not good teams, right? So like the Colts, the Bears, Packers. It's just like not good, right? So, okay. If you go 500 there, you're in a situation where you don't think that that team is as good as that record initially presented itself. But here's the thing. I think the difference here, and so if they go undefeated and then they get booted in the first round of the playoffs, a lot of like losing 3 games all year, going 14-3 to enter the playoffs, somehow still being the second seed, that is a hard thing to get removed from your brain when you're thinking about how good the team is. They won 14 games. They lost 3 games all year. Holy crap, sign me up. Right? And like, yeah, actually do sign me up. That sounds fun, but I'm still going to argue about who the Vikings are. It's just who I am. But, that's a lot of hope, and then getting booted in the first round of the playoffs, that sucks. But I do think that the other scenario is absolutely more gut-wrenching, because you go 500, fine, but you can excuse yourself. These games didn't matter. They had locked up the division. They were locked into the 2 seed. It doesn't matter. And then the games matter again, and you win the first round of the playoffs. I don't know, against like Seattle or Atlanta or Tampa Bay or whatever, right? It's against a team this way. But the second round of the playoffs, you're probably up against a good team. The worst case scenario is probably Washington in terms of how good that team is. And the best case scenario is like the Dallas Cowboys. And by that, I mean in terms of making you feel confident after a win, right? If you beat like Tampa Bay and then Washington, that's great. You're going to feel pretty confident going into the NFC Championship game, but it's not the same as like beating Dallas, right? Like that's going to feel, especially after the 40-3 whipping, right?
Exactly. I was going to say, especially after how badly they beat the Vikings, to turn that around would be one hell of an energy boost for the entire franchise and the entire fan base.
Absolutely. So I think that would matter more in terms of the amount of like hope that you bring into this NFC Championship game. Now, no matter what, because in this scenario, it's automatically going to be the Eagles, there is going to be dread, right? There's going to be dread because you don't want to interact with Eagles fans, right? Like you don't want to, because it's going to be in Philadelphia. You're going to have to go to Philadelphia, right? And deal with all of those a-holes, right? That were taunting you after the game if you went to the previous game, or at least you heard about them taunting people after the game, right? And they're going to keep on talking about 38-7 the whole time, and then it happens again. And that, like, you're going to have dread, but it's not going to short circuit the fact, like, it's not going to cut you off from how cool it was to beat the probable actual best team in the NFC, the Cowboys, right? Because with Dak Prescott, since Dak Prescott has joined the Cowboys have by far the best point differential in the league. They've scored the most points per game since Dak Prescott has re-entered the lineup as the starter, and they're still 5th in points per game allowed. So they are plus 17 in point margin per game. Some of it has to do with the fact that they beat the Vikings 40-3. They're plus 17 in point margin per game. The next best is like 12 points per game. 4th is like the Chiefs at 8 points per game. And the distance between them and the Chiefs is the same as the distance between the Chiefs and the Browns at 16th, right? Like the Dallas Cowboys are effing good right now. They might be the best team in the NFC. They just beat the crap out of the Vikings. You beat them in the divisional round. You are going to feel as high as a kite. You can say, we're finally going to get revenge on the Eagles. Now, as a Vikings fan, you know that nothing is guaranteed and that your life is probably horrible and you're dreading what the Eagles are going to do. but it's not going to, no amount of emotional guarding is going to prevent you from getting high on the Dallas Cowboys win and getting crushed when it happens again. It happening again with the Eagles would absolutely cement Vikings fans hating the Eagles, because I think it took a long time for Vikings fans to get over the Cowboys, and they kind of are, right? From the Drew Pearson 1975, plus all the stuff in the 90s and the Herschel Walker trade. And they kind of are at this point, right? Not entirely, but not significantly more than most fan bases hate the Cowboys, right? But this happens again at the Eagles in a 5-year span, I guess 6-year span. Done, right? You're absolutely done with Eagles and Eagles fans.
It'll be right up there with Saints fans.
Yeah, I think that most Vikings fans, while they do not respect Eagles fans, are over the emotional reactions they've had to that show. It's been 6 years, right? Eagles fans have stopped spamming people with 38-7. They would start again, obviously, in this scenario. And Vikings fans no longer feel as much. I'm speaking generally. You in particular might have a different response. But in general, my understanding is that Vikings fans no longer have like a visceral reaction to seeing an Eagles fan. They don't really hate the Eagles. They dislike the Eagles. Most Vikings fans still dislike the Eagles. They don't like hate the Eagles in the same way that like in the 2000s, they hated the Cowboys because of the combination of all the playoff losses and the Herschel Walker trade. But they would, or the Saints, right? They still hate the Saints, right? But they would despise the Eagles for 20 years if that happened. So that kind of emotional wrenching, I think it's that one.
You know, if the Vikings do find themselves in the NFC Championship game against the Eagles, I wonder if we could have some sort of a bake sale in order to like be in Philadelphia for that, just to see the chaos ensue.
Oh, that would be a lot of fun.
We'd have to wear helmets to prevent like being attacked by batteries, though.
Yeah, no, for sure.
You'd have to protect me since you're 7 feet tall.
Yeah, you know, exactly. I was literally about to say the exact same thing.
It'll be the opposite of the Seattle situation. It'll be great.
Yeah, hide in my shadow, James.
Boy, if that's not an allegory for something. Tank B asks, for James's linear Super Bowl corner, all of this talk of the linear Super Bowl trophy being split up or creating copies is ignoring the fact that the next time we beat the Packers, or next season at the latest, there will once again be an outcry that the victory is our Super Bowl. Does this create a second linear Super Bowl, and does it simply reset every year and start with us? At what point will this time manipulation cause multiple Arifs, and will the second Don that is produced actually remember to set his lineups in fantasy?
Brutal. Again, answering last question first, no. There's no version of Don that will remember to set his lineups in fantasy. But every version of Don will brag after wins despite not having managed the fantasy team. How Don remembers to check on Monday but not on Thursday, beyond me. But that's what happens. So my understanding, and James, correct me if I am wrong about my understanding, is that just like the regular Super Bowl, just like the Lombardi that actually gets awarded, it doesn't matter once the next season starts. Like, you are the reigning champion, but it, like, when the next Super Bowl happens, like, that's that Super Bowl, right?
You are reigning, but you're not really defending.
Exactly, right? Until you actually get to that, so you're not defending, right? So in the same way, that's just in your trophy case at the end of the year. The linear Super Bowl trophy is in your trophy case at the end of the year. Now, again, there's two, right? Because the Vikings play the Packers twice, but only if the Vikings win. If the Vikings lose, the whole point of the mockery is that the Packers don't view the Vikings as their Super Bowl. So a trophy is not produced if the Packers win. It's only produced if the Vikings win. If there are other versions of Super Bowls, right? Your Super Bowl, that appears, that can be settled on a case-by-case basis, right? If, for example, this happens with the Eagles, the scenario we just described in the last question, and the Vikings win against the Eagles, they would probably say something like, this is your Super Bowl. And honestly, the way Vikings fans would react, yeah, probably. There is a Super Bowl 2 weeks later, right? So that is going to change that element of it, right? But I do remember Eagles fans saying something along those lines in 2017 when the Vikings beat the Eagles, right? Because I remember that happening, right? Or 2018, right? Because they did play the Eagles again the year later and won, and nobody cared. I should say nobody cared. The Eagles fans didn't care. Certainly the Vikings were only having an okay season. Not as good as it should have been, given that they just signed a $30 million quarterback. But certainly it felt like Eagles fans were saying, like, this is your Super Bowl. But it didn't feel the same as beating the Packers, if I remember correctly. So, but I think Eagles fans would say this is your Super Bowl, especially if the Vikings go on to lose that Super Bowl, right? Then maybe we could discuss it. Maybe we could have that conversation based off of kind of the tenor of the fan bases and how people react and stuff like that. But for now, that seems to be the only Super Bowl, and that Super Bowl gets moved into your trophy case at the end of the year. And there are some years where there is no linear Super Bowl because the Vikings have lost to the Packers twice. Shockingly, that has not actually happened all that often. They don't tend to get swept by the Packers despite the disparity in divisional performance. But, something to keep in mind.
Yeah. The Gaming Nerd asks, for a Reef's horrible history in the making corner, we're all acutely aware of the fact that the 2021 Vikings were historically terrible in the final 2 minutes of the half. With our loss to the Lions, we have once again made history by being the winningest team to have a negative point differential at this point in the season. With this pair of brown trophies in our case, what record should the 2023 Vikings look to break next year? Follow-up question for James, can we trust the Vikings to win another terrible title in 2023, or does our lack of trust mean that we can't trust them to be bad?
Okay, that is an interesting question for you, James. I like that. I also just want to comment on the use of a color to describe a mood for like an object. So brown trophies, phenomenal work there, great writing. What record should the 2023 Vikings look to break next year? Most offensive yards gained in a loss, or most offensive yards in a losing season, right? Because if all this luck stuff that we are talking about is true, and the Vikings rubber band back and actually get worse even, so worse than regression, but the offense stays good, most offensive yards for a losing team, for a losing season. I think that would be good.
As for your what is the color of a mirror question here, no, you're doubling back. It doesn't. I'm afraid you're entering paradox territory, and we're just not going to go there. Jason asks, not sure if you recall, but wide receiver Jalen Reagor guaranteed that the Vikings would win Sunday against the Lions. Recall. Your mortal enemy, Luke Braun, on the football party, is he your mortal enemy? I thought Michael Kist was.
Michael Kist is a mortal enemy. Well, he's an arch enemy. Luke Braun is like a nemesis. He's not my mortal enemy. I'll break down the taxonomy of my my antagonisms later for sure. That's worth doing though.
It's like, hold on, I can prove this. So give me 15 minutes on a whiteboard. Your mortal enemy Luke Braun on the Football Party podcast eloquently stated in response to Reagor's guarantee, "Have you not dealt with God? Has our defense not dealt with God, or are they dealing with God currently? Is there an answer? And if so, does Ed Donatel suffice as a sacrificial lamb to curing our ailing defense? And if not, do we need more?"
So the sacrifice needs to occur at the proper time, with the proper reverence, with the proper rituals. So I would suggest that occurs basically after the season, right? So maybe, but not to resolve any problems this season. Has the defense not dealt with God? Certainly the way they are playing is not very saintly. Are they dealing with God currently? Only in a very kind of introspective, what have I done with my life sense? Is there an answer? There never is. Do we need more sacrifices? No, I've seen the injury report.
Ouch. I was going to say they're dealing with the God in the same way that I do when I'm driving to work and I can't see the road. I've got a lot of churches I've got to build before my time is up here. Tim Rizzo asks, what is one football opinion and one worldview that you hold that you consider wildly unpopular and would likely cause you much more harm than good to make public, such as on this podcast? Yes, Arif, we know you believe magic is real, as in momentum in games, so they don't count.
Oh my God. Okay. Football opinion. Tom Brady is not a top 5 quarterback of all time. That's like, he's a very good quarterback, obviously, but I think what happens when you get a quarterback that benefits from a lot of essentially luck, but not in the sense that we're talking about with like the Vikings or anything like that. Sometimes, right? Like with the made kick, the tuck rule, and the made kick against the Raiders and the Blizzard, and the way that he gets rewarded for comebacks and Super Bowls that really are more a product of the people around him than him. He is a very good quarterback, a great quarterback, right? What happens when you give like the 6th or 8th best quarterback of all time the best circumstances in the world is you end up with 7 Super Bowls. Like, that's what happens, right? That's like, I could detail all of the things that make me suspicious of Tom Brady's ethereal greatness, right? Like, I think he's just an extremely good, maybe great quarterback, but not the greatest quarterback of all time. I think that belongs to people who have either suffered from bad luck or bad circumstances, or actually none of those things, right? And just were good and won a lot, like Steve Young and Joe Montana. And from the bad luck perspective, Dan Marino, right? Like, I think Dan Marino might be a better quarterback historically than Aaron Rodgers. And that one's, I guess, probably not like for Vikings fans, not a hard sell. But also Tom Brady, right? Peyton Manning, right? Is it like those 4 have a great argument, I think, to be better, right? And then you can go like really deep into history, like maybe not that deep, right, with like Johnny Unitas, but like deep into history. I think that's probably the football opinion that is pretty wildly unpopular, right? To put quarterbacks like Peyton Manning, and there's something to be said about his like postseason performances, but if you also look at the defenses he's had heading into the postseasons versus the defenses Brady's had, it is wild. I think Scott Kazmar had something on that, which, I mean, he also has like a Brady kick for basically the same reasons. But yeah, that's kind of where I am. And, you know, that's a tough sell. I get it. Second wildly unpopular football opinion is probably that Joe Namath was actually good and deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and people don't have a great context for his career. That's spelled out really well on footballperspective.com. I'll probably link that article. That's Chase Stewart's footballperspective.com. As for one worldview, I have not done the Wide Left podcast in about 3 years now. But I laid out some pretty wildly unpopular ones, at least from a global perspective, or at least from an American perspective. Fairly unpopular political takes and worldviews about the way the world works. I'll leave, instead of my global understanding of politics or my desired political outcome, which I've stated a couple of times in that podcast, I'll say for this one that is wildly unpopular, I'm a gender abolitionist. I will let all of you try and figure out what that means.
Not sure even I want to like Google that. I feel like Googling that's going to put me on a list. I'm already on so many lists with you. Like,
it's bad.
Based on the Tom Brady conversation we had at the beginning of the newest Patreon.
Oh yeah, no, you're definitely on a list after that.
Which, by the way, this is my selling point. The first 10 minutes of that are absolute gold.
So James messaged me earlier today. He's like, Arif, I need you to listen to the first 10 minutes of the Patreon episode I'm going to release, because I need to clear it by you before we make it public.
And I never do this.
This has never happened.
I never do this. My job is to make sure Arif doesn't get, fired, canceled, whatever. And I just wanted to make sure to cover my butt that this was going to be okay. So that's the level of wonderfulness you can expect over at Patreon for this newest bonus episode. Just
sign up.
Yeah, that. Let's go to Logan, who asks, Besides Access Vikings, I tend to only listen to other NFL podcasts if a reef is on them. Minnesota Football Party, that baseball one when a reef describes football,
That
etc.
one's great.
Which makes me think I'm an Arif groupie. Bands are known for having hardcore fan names, Deadheads, Swifties, etc. What do you recommend for an Arif groupie name?
Jeez. Does this mean I get my own like K-pop stan group on Twitter?
I'm surprised you don't already have it. Your cult of personality is, I'm not complaining about it because it's led to the success of the show, but it is, in fact, a thing.
Well, sure, but it's also like like Taylor Swift fans will like go to the mat to defend her against the slightest perception of an insult, right? My fans will join in. There's a difference.
I mean, she wrote Graduation, apparently, so.
That's right. That's right. Taylor Swift wrote Graduation now.
Who knew?
That was a pretty good meme. Which, man, I assume you've seen the Kanye subreddit.
Yeah, we actually talk about that in the newest Patreon episode.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, James doesn't actually send me the Patreon. He just sent me this 10-minute clip. So I never know what's in the Patreon episodes, and I get reminded of the stuff I talk about all the time, which is disturbing because I should talk less, except for money purposes. I don't know if there's a good Arif groupie name. First of all, I'm uncomfortable with the idea. I want to make that clear. Second, I can't think of one that doesn't make me think I'm just making fun of my name, which I kind of don't want to do. Also, like Swifties, Deadheads, those are great names. I don't think I can compete with that. What are Jimmy Buffett fans? I feel like there's a name for Jimmy Buffett fans. Parrot heads. Okay, that one sucks, but it rules because it sucks. Right? You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Well, you've got a couple of options here. Obviously, the wreaths make the most sense out of anything here.
Crap, that one's pretty good.
The wreaths are good. You could also go with the turkeys, but I feel like... No, you don't... Shut up for a second. You have a love-hate relationship with your audience in that you love them, but you also despise them, so...
Oh, so you think that because I play as if I despise my audience, that calling them turkeys will work? But I don't like that. Not because I don't like to make fun of the fact that I hate my listeners, but it's just because like I rail against turkey every year. It's only kind of a bit that I hate my listening audience. It's not like a thing. It's just something I'll throw out there every couple of episodes. Like turkey is like front and center. Yeah. I hate it. I'll rail against it. I don't know. That one. The only issue with the wreaths is that it sounds itself like a band, but it is good.
So it's almost, you could almost view them as like the wraiths from like Lord of the Rings.
Oh, now that sounds cool as hell. Dang it!
Oh no. I may have caused an...
We'll probably get a bunch of suggestions too. So
I may have accidentally created a merchandise opportunity.
Ring wreaths.
Yeah. Also, for James's relationship corner, this will be good. My wife will be 36 weeks pregnant at Christmas time, and I'm struggling with what to buy her. She's very pregnant, but any clothes will either fit her for a month or not fit her over the next 2. Also, she doesn't care for jewelry. What do you recommend? Also, Arif, does James's recommendation seem like a good one? I have a supervisor for this, apparently.
Very rarely have I disagreed with James, especially in the parenting corner. Most often what happens is I spit something out and James is like, Arif, have you been in a relationship or have you heard of kids? Let me reel that one back for you. So, unlikely that I'll disagree, but I do want to add something before the show. I was asking James, I was like, hey, James, please tell me if I'm wrong, but the way I'm reading this is if you buy something for the kid and treat it like a gift for the wife, you're basically saying that the kid is more yours than mine and it's more your responsibility than mine. And when I take care of the kid, that's a gift. And when you take care of the kid, that's expected. So don't give her a gift that's related to taking care of the kid? And you said, yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a cop out. We're not doing that.
Yeah, perfect.
You can give a gift to the kid as like being cute.
This is the kid's first Christmas gift.
Yeah,
right. That's what you're doing.
Yep, you can absolutely do that. Like, kid's first toy or something. But that's a cop out here. We're going straight up gift. I'm thinking nacho cheese fountain. I'm thinking either nacho cheese fountain or chocolate fountain. You're not gonna do clothes. If you are gonna do clothes, get something that you're gonna like to wear, and just like have her wear it. And then when she loses the weight, be like, oh well, you can't. It doesn't fit you anymore. This will be fine for me.
So it'll have to not be tailored for maternity, is what you're saying.
Yes,
it'll
exactly.
just have to be big generally.
Maybe this is the time to spend the extra money on the football jersey. Make it fit her now, and you can just wear it afterwards.
I think that one actually. So my issue with that is that it's pretty transparent, right? That you just got yourself a gift. I think if you do that, it can't be as transparent as that.
No, I disagree. You're already going to be in trouble, so why not just embrace this? It's like when Homer bought it's a bit like when Homer bought Marge the bowling ball for like an anniversary gift.
That's bad. That was an example of it being bad.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that absolutely did blow back and nearly led to the end of their marriage. Yeah,
I think that for me, probably the best gift is something that only marginally, if at all, interacts with the fact that she's pregnant. And by that, I mean a gift that is very particular to your relationship. So some unique moment in your relationship, or a unique object, or if you're both fans of the same show and you've bonded over that, something related to that, and just make it like insanely extra within that context, right? So if you're both a fan of, I don't know, I was just listening to the Patreon episode, so we were just talking about Michael Schur for reasons that will become apparent if you listen to the Patreon episode. But that was the creator of The Good Place, and Chelsea and I are huge fans of The Good Place. You could get like a signed, what's the name of the guy? Ted Danson?
Yes.
Cool. I'm so bad at names, man. You get like a signed, like an autographed Ted Danson picture or Kristen Bell picture, right? For her, maybe, and maybe like not like a generic one, but like made out with her name to her or something like that. Like that's a super extra gift in that like if you're both fans of The Good Place or something along those lines, right? Or memorabilia from the show specifically, like the frog that the guy gets at the gates to Earth. If you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. Something along those lines that is difficult to get, but shows that you've been paying a lot of attention to the things that both of you value in a relationship a lot, or a place that you've been to that was very romantic to both of you. Maybe a memento that is very specific to that place. Doesn't have to be from it, but it has to be reminiscent of it. Something that doesn't necessarily have to interact with the fact that she's pregnant. Or
nacho cheese fountain.
I mean, honestly not actually bad. Mm-hmm. Especially if the cravings that she's gotten relate to that. Get a fountain related to whatever cravings she's gotten most often during pregnancy. If it doesn't apply after week 4, kind of doesn't matter. Most of the gifts you're going to get kind of don't apply after 4 weeks anyway. And something like a fondue fountain or something like that is well within that category of things that seem like great gifts at the time, and you don't use it very much after that. That's honestly pretty normal.
Still great for parties. Still great for just about any possible event you could throw. You will get asked to bring the nacho cheese fountain wherever you go. No, for sure.
That's the couple you are now.
Yeah,
which is not a bad thing, but that is the couple you are now.
You can just learn and accept it. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back later this week to preview the Colts game, which is on Saturday this weekend. So, Arif, what do you have to plug?
Over at Pro Football Network, I talk about Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson's chances of winning the MVP. Spoiler, pretty low. Pretty sure you know that, but I think the article's worth reading anyway. There's a couple of post-game recaps there, obviously the Vikings game, as well as the 49ers-Buccaneers game. I did also do a piece on how the Eagles were the only good team to play well this last weekend, and I've got some draft content coming up that if you're super into the draft, you might enjoy. So head over to profootballnetwork.com, especially for my pieces, profootballnetwork.com/author/ASON, to see those pieces.
Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back later this week. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that this is not sustainable. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.